back to Women Making Moves, where we celebrate the moves that women are making. My name is Amy Pons. I'm a Master Certified Life Coach and an energy healer. I'm joined today with Danielle Keiser. Danielle is a globally recognized expert in menstrual health, Essence App advisor, and consultant specialized in menstrual innovation, cycle wellness, and strategic foresight around female health. Since 2013, she's worked tirelessly to advance menstrual health across the public and private sectors, first with helping launch Menstrual Hygiene Day, and then founding the Menstrual Health Hub. She is an author of the official definition of menstrual health. She's led global collective impact initiatives with international civil society actors like UNICEF and high-level consulting projects with clients like Johnson & Johnson, Essity, The Body Shop, Flow, and the Wikimedia Foundation, among others. Danielle, welcome.
Hey there. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm so happy we could make this work. We literally met 2 days ago, and we were going to cover so much stuff in this episode. Women Making Moves launched on Menstrual Health Day a year ago. I love that that's kind of like the anchor of Women Making Moves, because it's saying the things that we might not be saying in mainstream society and doing the work of feeling into the divine feminine and how we celebrate and amplify our innate magic that we are as women. It's all pretty exquisite. And I just started using Flow about a month and a half ago. And in beautiful divine fashion, I started my period this morning, and my beautiful sacred cramps are raging and ramping throughout my body. So
wow, we've got a triple whammy here.
I know. So here we are.
Yeah, actually, this year is going to be celebrating the 10-year anniversary of Menstrual Health and Hygiene Day. We started working on it in 2014, and since then, it's really become this international day for product launches, for raising awareness. Sometimes there's even marches in different cities around the world. So it's so nice that it's resonated with you and been so significant to your own development.
I found out on like a Friday afternoon last year that Menstruation Health Day was on Sunday, like 2 days later. And I was like, cool, let's launch a podcast. And that was went from there. So I think it was beautiful because it was, again, the divine feminine flowing in to help me create and birth the podcast. And then also the divine masculine that provided the structure in which to do so. So it was awesome. Perfect energetic balance. And you can see, obviously, I'm an energy coach. Everything's energy to me. So
you want to know why it's the 28th of May?
Yes.
As you probably well know, the average number of days in a menstrual cycle is 28.
Yes.
The new research has showed 29.3, but that's besides the point. And people who menstruate bleed for an average of 5 days, and May is the 5th month of the year. So it was very strategically chosen on the 28th of May for that symbolism.
Perfect. See, this is the vibe. This is the info I want. So question around that. And actually, I headed into that weekend a year ago, menstrual hygiene, and I was quickly helped to understand that it was moving more into menstruation health because, again, the stigma around menstruation and the cycles is dirty, stinky, shameful. Can you talk to me a little bit about originally Menstrual Hygiene Day, right? And then also, obviously, you've done so many things in 10 years. We are with one of the original founders of this International Day of Health for Menstruation Cycles. So, Danielle.
Thank you so much for acknowledging that. So the origin of Menstrual Hygiene Day is that it was and is created by a water sanitation and hygiene behavior change awareness organization. They're called WASH United. WASH stands for Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene. They sit in Berlin and have long been a social impact organization that really focuses on improving hygiene behaviors like hand washing with soap, trying to end open defecation. And at the time, the topic of menstrual hygiene management, MHM for short, was just starting to gain a little bit of traction in the international development space alongside topics of these ones that I just mentioned. And what we have to really acknowledge is that we wouldn't be anywhere today with our menstrual cycle wellness and our divine feminine stuff if it hadn't been for the water sanitation and hygiene sector actually creating space to acknowledge the important role that menstrual hygiene plays in enabling girls and women to reach their full potential. So what do I mean by this? So not in places like the United States or places like Europe, but in places around the world, there are not basic sanitation facilities like we might expect. They are inappropriate in a number of ways. They don't meet human rights standards. And as such, this has become a real reason why girls fail out at school at an early age. They start their periods and they go to school and there's not even locks on the toilet. There might not even be a toilet for them to use. And so this compounded with the fact that maybe they're experiencing pain, compounded with the fact that menstrual products might not be easy to access or might be very affordable, or whatever methods they have been using, cut up pieces of scrap or cloth, are not effective. All of this kind of compounds to a reality that periods hold girls back because of inadequate sanitation infrastructure and lack to access of products. So we have to position ourselves in our privilege to realize that this origin really comes from a basic needs perspective, and have to celebrate that because this is a reality in many parts of the world. To that point, though, when I was working there for the first 3 years, so from 2013 to 16, Menstrual Hygiene Day was like my thing. I was in charge of all the communications, all the global advocacy, and would go to events to try to promote it and just get it big. And I'll never forget this. I went to a conference called the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research, which is here in the US. It's mostly academic conference, but there's a lot of activists as well. And at the time, it was kind of the only gathering of people really nerdy about menstruation coming together. My job was to sell Menstrual Hygiene Day to this group of people and have them jump on board, celebrate, join the global banging of the drum. And I thought, this is going to be one of the easiest assignments I've ever done. Go to a menstruation conference, get people on board for Menstrual Hygiene Day. Oh boy, was I wrong about that. I realized very similarly to what you had said in starting our conversation, that this terminology hygiene was really repulsive to so many people, and that it was reinforcing this idea that vaginas are dirty and disgusting things that need to be cleaned up, and menstruations is gross process, and that we need sanitary products to hygienically maintain the cleanliness of our vaginas. And so I was like, okay, I hear you. Hygiene's not great. It's not resonating with you. What could be better? And so we had this little roundtable discussion. They're like, menstrual day, menstruation day, menstrual health day. And I was like, cool, noted. Went back to my team in Germany. And I was like, hey guys, we're really early in the development of this day. Why don't we change the name or ditch the hygiene part? Because all of these people with their academic backgrounds, especially Western people, more evolved in the conversation and are not digging the hygiene piece. My boss, a man, told me to zip it, and that my suggestions are not helpful, not useful, and there's no way we're going to change Menstrual Hygiene Day to anything else. And I was like, but, and he's like, zip it. And so I felt really crushed because it wasn't just me who was making that suggestion. I was listening to other people, whereas the terminology still is used, menstrual hygiene management, in places like India or East Africa. It really never stuck in a Western cultural narrative whatsoever. And so from then on, I went on a crusade. I went on a 5-year crusade to get anyone and everyone in the WASH sector, in the sexual and reproductive health space, in the coaching space, in the gynecological space, to reframe the conversation from hygiene to health. And the reasons are pretty simple to me. Hygiene is an indicator of health. We wash our hands, we wash our bodies, we brush our teeth to maintain a status of health. We keep ourselves healthy through hygiene behaviors. Health is also broad, it's inclusive, it's a status. And so, I was really just nonstop focused on getting everyone to start using the term menstrual health and couch menstrual hygiene in menstrual health. And all of that crusading was quite effective because in 2021, together with the Global Menstrual Collective and some of the brightest academics and researchers in the field, we came together to develop an official definition of menstrual health for researchers, policymakers, and all those around to start with. And so that's a long version of a very important story.
So I want to hear what the official menstruation health definition is,
Mhm.
and also how in the actual fuck did that man think he had right to shut down a larger body of people who have uteruses and had an opinion about the name?
That's a really great question, and I still don't have the answer to it. And I had to work through that trauma for the
Sure.
next 5 years of really having someone clip my wings and shut me up, not just because of the gender thing, but because once I fell into this topic, I fell head over heels in love. I gave it 150% of my time and attention. So, Amy, unfortunately, I can't answer that second question.
Beyond even gender, though, it's perpetuating the continual harmful narrative that our beautiful biological function of all life force, vitality, the entire human experience comes from the womb space, this space within people who can menstruate and procreate and provide life. It all starts and ends there.
Yeah, but this is not what the water sanitation and hygiene sector was interested in and still is not interested in. So there's a very large disconnect between access to products and the conversations around menstrual equity and menstrual hygiene and what you're talking about, which is a more spiritual understanding and embodied understanding of menstrual health. They're very different. One is practical, like things you can kick, like a pad, a tampon, a menstrual cup, how to use it. There's no real cyclical awareness that's plugged into that basic educational international development perspective. And this is where I was very frustrated and felt like there are too many people working in silos when we're all talking about variations of the same thing.
Yeah, I understand that I just got a little woo, but I'm also saying like, was that a miss? You know what I'm saying? Because like it still is
Oh,
okay. So
yeah.
take out the life force and vitality in womb space because I am an energy healer. And the same time though, it is a very biological function. And interestingly, you bring up when I think about period poverty, I used to think about it as people who couldn't afford products. I actually was enlightened to learn that it's actually also, for instance, in my Fortune 200 office, corporate sprawling campus, we still had those quarter machines.
Mhm.
If I didn't have a quarter, that was actually me experiencing period poverty. I could not get access to a period product. So it was fascinating to think about that. And I led the women's employee resource group. First of all, our C-suite didn't know. They had quarter machines because they had their own C-suite bathrooms that didn't have those. And they were like, oh, it didn't occur to us to make those free. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, so here we
Yeah.
are. So we got the entire international, all of the machines globally to be reconfigured to be free.
That's a huge win. And that's the thing is like menstrual health is so seemingly innocuous because it's so omnipresent, right? And people are so unaware of it because it's literally on. You are in your menstrual health
Mhm.
from menarche. I'd even argue a little bit before because you necessarily have to ovulate before your first period. So 10 years old, maybe 11
Wow.
years old-ish until 1 year after your last period. So that goes from 10 years old to 50-ish. So
Hmm.
we're talking 40 years over the entire span of our lives, which is 80 to 90% of our working lives that has been completely ignored, that has been completely hush-hushed around. And it's only been since the advent of Menstrual Hygiene Day that we've been able to talk about topics and branch out beyond hygiene to health, to cyclical awareness, to education, to innovation in menstrual products, to the menstrual disorders that are plaguing so many people these days, to the psychological distress, to all the different areas.
So is that the definition?
So the definition of menstrual health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity in relation to the menstrual cycle. And achieving menstrual health implies that women, girls, and other people who menstruate and experience a menstrual cycle throughout their life course are able to do 5 things. So these 5 things are actually the most important part of the menstrual health definition. One, access accurate, timely, age-appropriate information about the cycle, about the bleeding phase, and about the changes experienced throughout their life course, as well as related self-care and hygiene practices. Number two is that they have the care for their bodies during their menstruation such that their preferences, hygiene, comfort, safety, privacy are supported. This includes accessing and using effective and affordable menstrual materials and having supportive facilities and services, including water sanitation and hygiene, washing the body and hands with clean water and soap, and then changing the menstrual materials and disposing of them and cleaning them, however, having the things that they need to do that. Number three is access to a timely diagnosis, treatment, and care for menstrual cycle related discomforts and disorders, including access to appropriate health services, resources and providers, pain relief, and strategies for self-care. And then the last two are very important, but I think they're a little bit more relevant to the international development context, and that is more cultural and sociocultural. So the fourth one is that they are allowed to experience a positive and respectful environment in relation to the menstrual cycle, free from stigma and psychological distress, including the resources and support they need to confidently care for their bodies and make informed decisions about self-care throughout their cycle. And then the last one is that they're able to decide whether and how to participate in all spheres of life, including civil, cultural, economic, social, political participation during all the phases of their menstrual cycle, free from menstrual related exclusion, restriction, discrimination, coercion, and or violence. That's the complete definition.
Ooh.
I know it's a lot to chew on, huh?
Like that's a dream.
It's a vision, and it's really beautiful that we've been able to separate it out into these 5 areas that are so completely complementary to each other, but also very distinct in their specificity. So as anything good in academia, it's a living definition. And, we would love to be able to update this in a few years as things evolve to make sure that it's as comprehensive as possible.
What I heard through all of that, and the reason I said it was a dream is because that's what I want. I'm an intersectional feminist and a healer and a coach. And the ultimate goal behind my work, my business, is building psychological safety in every facet of your life, particularly women and people of color, that this world, society, workplace was not designed with us in mind. And so that's what I just kept hearing being reinforced throughout that. So first, thank you for reading all of that. And that's incredible. And I want to shout that from the rooftops. I want to actually put that in all the show notes and everything, that full scope. So I love also what you said about, so I'm an elder millennial. When I learned about my menstrual cycle, I learned from a girl's perspective, I learned about it from the point of procreation, really only. So it wasn't really first of all, when we talk about what is a vagina versus a vulva versus a uterus versus a clitoris, all of the actual anatomy, and you used an interesting word throughout, which is the sharing of the knowledge when it's appropriate for age. Now, would I have understood when I was 10 about my clitoris? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know who's in charge of that piece of it. I'm saying that I would have loved to have known, especially heading into my teenage years, more about what we see on the outside. It's not our vagina.
Nope.
It's our vulva. And there's been this rash, no pun intended, of men coming out on podcasts and public forums talking about the different ways vulvas look and judging them. And women then go out and have their labias cut or bleached or all these things because of mainstream porn, but also these men that are shaming. Anyway, my point is, not only now are young girls, especially growing up in this world where suddenly the terms of any or outie vaginas is a thing, it gets into so much more about owning, loving, celebrating our own bodies. And I did grow up in a time where it was stinky, dirty, etc., to have a period. And it's taken me a long time to really celebrate my body. And listen, I'm not trying to say that fibroids, endometriosis, some of these other things that you're saying about what can come along with not just menstrual, but having a uterus, those are painful. But I do celebrate and love that my body every single month sheds literally physically sheds what no longer serves me. So I love that you're talking about the whole life cycle of the 40, 50 years. And it's like different rites of passages. It's like, okay, we have a
Hmm.
uterus, a vagina, a vulva, a clitoris, however far you want to go with it. And here's what the functions are. And then, oh, by the way, when it becomes age appropriate, whatever that means, here's how to give pleasure and why that's important and to celebrate. Because again, still in the US, on average, it's 24 for a woman to have her first orgasm. And so when do you teach partners? It's also teaching the own self. And then again, the rite of passage into perimenopause, menopause, when a lot of women are in their prime of their careers. And yet still, to your point, you mentioned something about it's not only that they're maybe cast aside or more emotional, they sometimes have to leave or they're judged or demoted in this time when they need the most support. So that
Yeah.
was a lot. That was a lot to chew on too. So that's what came up for me when you were reading all that.
Yeah. I'll comment on the education piece and then the can carry on from there. But
Okay.
a lot of the problem is that the people that are responsible for delivering this information are they themselves not confident in their own bodies or have had their own experiences to really deliver this information with the kind of care and sensitivity and confidence that is needed for it to be received that way, right? And so we have a big disconnect between the audience and the trained trainers. And this is why having a definition is so helpful because it lets people know that it's not just about this bleeding day or bleeding days, but that it's so much more. And yeah, I mean, if I had had information, if I had had the information that I only developed when I was 25 or so about my menstrual cycle, I wonder where I would be. I think I'd be in such a different place. It would have helped me to, first of all, like I see menstrual health as a Trojan horse. If we can get menstrual health right in the beginning, then all these other things can happen right afterwards. You have more agency. You feel more self-confident. You're prepared to prevent any embarrassing situations. We talk about it as the Trojan horse in this context precisely because of its powerful potential to lock in really important experiences that most people have, whether that's sexual debut or STIs or potential teenage pregnancy. All of these things become a lot easier to talk about and deal with in practicality's sake when someone actually understands I don't want it to be too woo and say the magic behind the cycle, but that there is a very purposeful rhythm that's there that guides us in this compass-like way that lets us know when our energy is full and we're bright and full of potential and can go, go, go. I mean, there's sometimes in my follicular and ovulatory phases where I can work for like 14 hours a day and I love it and I don't tire and I am good. But then, the few days after my ovulation, maybe around day 22 or 23, that's also when I take a break from coffee, is when I really heed progesterone's call. I mean, I can go back and explain a little bit more about this before just throwing in these weird hormone words, where I could not even possibly imagine working 14 hours a day. I can maybe put in like 3 or 4, and I'm really prioritizing rest and recharging so that the next cycle I can do it again. And if you look at this over the course of a month, if people actually were to measure productivity, you're probably more productive over the course of a month because you're really optimizing your energy instead of forcing yourself and pushing yourself to fit into a paradigm and a way that society is organized that doesn't actually work for 51% of the population.
So I'm obsessed with what you're saying right now. And I know that you don't want to get too woo, but like I do live in the woo and I do also live in the practical, like, having operated there for 20 years and only the masculine energy. But my business is Unlock the Magic and I am tapping back inward. And that's what I coach others to do. It's really going back inward and trusting your body, your nature. It's going back in rather than all external factors. So what I love so much about what you're saying is that learning how to work with your cycle. And like I said, I just signed up for Flow about the last month and a half. And Danielle, like I want to be your best friend because I want to learn from you especially as an entrepreneur, because the days where I don't feel good, I still feel like I have to force myself through because that's my livelihood. And to your point, that's the whole thing, though. I'm helping us shift into a new paradigm where we actually do trust inward. And I'm much better at helping others do that than for myself. And I would love to know that because on the days where I don't feel good, it can feel so
Debilitating.
it feels like, oh, should I just go back to the grind or the hustle? So,
This is exactly what I do. So you found the exact right person, and I'm so pleased just to hear you talk about it in this way. So I'm going to go back to basics a little bit for your viewers and or for your listeners. So I want to lay a simple yet really powerful foundation that dissects the 4 key phases and the 2 main hormones of the menstrual cycle. It's way more complicated than that, but let's keep it at
yeah.
Lego level, so to say, right? So in biology class, we were taught this linear version of the menstrual cycle with the period in the beginning, and there's this roller coaster of hormones that ebb and flow. They kind of look like rolling hills, right? Lots of menstrual apps and companies use this version. And I personally find this extremely misleading. It shows, again, a linear process. It's not a linear process. It's a cycle. It's called the menstrual cycle, right? So I wanted to create something different, and I can share that with you so that people can know. I actually even got it tattooed on my arm
Oh, that's
here.
awesome. That's so awesome.
But so the linear version is the one that we learn, and I really want to call on people to unlearn that linear version. And so if we could kind of remove that from our brains and put it to the side and instead take on a cyclical version, because it does represent a cycle, and also the proportions in those diagrams are wildly inaccurate and don't accurately communicate the ebbs and flows of the hormones each month. So first thing to take away is that there's 2 main hormones, estrogen and progesterone. There are sex hormones, and they're kind of sitting in the driver's seat, in the passenger seat of our menstrual cycle. There's a host of other ones, including testosterone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, but we won't get into those ones. These are the main 2 that we want to know about. And estrogen is our feel-good hormone. This is our energetic hormone. It's also known as the caring hormone. It climbs after the period to just around ovulation in what is called our follicular phase. So the first phase of the menstrual cycle, which starts with first day of our period, is the menstrual phase. The second phase is the follicular phase. So I always like to think of estrogen as our Lizzo hormone that makes us feel really good. It raises our self-confidence. It shines love. It shines light. It's I got you, girl. You are on top of the world. We can do this together.
That's me today, right? Because my period started today.
No, that will be you in a week.
Oh, that's when my cycle began because my cycle's at the end right now.
No, you started your period today.
Right.
And so day 1. And so your hormones are actually at the lowest levels. Everything's going out. Think of yourself as empty.
Yeah, I'm shedding.
You're shedding, and your hormones, estrogen, progesterone, they just kind of crashed and plummeted because you're starting a new cycle. So today is reset button.
Okay. It's cool because we can use me as real time. Yeah. Today I'm low. When am I going to be in my Lizzo era?
So technically the follicular phase starts today, and that's when estrogen starts slowly climbing up towards ovulation.
Okay.
So from now to about 2 weeks from now, you'll be in your increasingly Lizzo'd phase. Yeah. Progesterone, on the other hand, is the hormone that dominates the second half of the cycle. So estrogen first half, progesterone second half. And if estrogen was building up the lining inside of your endometrium, this one maintains that uterine lining for potential implantation, supporting early pregnancy if fertilization occurs. It's the opposite of the estrogen hormone. And what I mean by that is that it might call on us to be more introverted than we would normally be. And PMS, which usually takes place about a week before the period, is usually a result of too low of levels of progesterone. And so what we can do to create more progesterone is to actually listen to our bodies and chill the fuck out. We fail to do that time in, time again, because we think the world's going to burn down because we're not finished like writing this email to these people, but that's not the truth. And when we have a shot of espresso on day 25 or so, when we're actually really tired and our body's like, I'm done. I just want to like do some gentle yoga and go to sleep early. And we're like, no, I have to meet this deadline. This is when PMS occurs because the body remembers all those times that you said, fuck you, progesterone, I'm going to have another shot of coffee. Fuck you, progesterone, I'm going to go meet my deadline. And so my reminder of progesterone is if estrogen was Lizzo, then progesterone is your Billie Eilish hormone. It's introverted, soft and quiet, emotional and sensitive. You're still making amazing music, but you're doing it in a very different way and showing that in a very different way. I'll pause
Mhm.
there. Any thoughts or questions just
Oh
on
my
the
gosh. I
hormone?
mean, Danielle, this is mind blowing. I'm 42. This is the first
Mhm.
time in my entire life I've heard this information, like
Mhm.
placed this way. I love myself. I trust myself. I value myself. I am magical. I
Mhm.
am the value. And then there are days, especially based on what you just explained, where I'm like, ugh, I want to go live under a rock
And
because
that's okay. Go live under that rock.
it feels like my magic tanks.
Yeah, that's okay. Your magic needs to recharge.
Mm,
You can't use your cell phone all the time without recharging it. Think of it as a investment in a next phase that's better. You
yeah,
know, we don't have daytime all the time. Our capitalist society teaches us that it's daytime all the time and
exactly.
that we don't actually have night to rest. And we need rest. We need recharging. We need that time for recalibration, or else we're in burnout mode all the time and we're just like pouring from an empty cup. So progesterone is really that like, baby girl, take care of your health as if it's your own baby.
Yeah.
This is the message of the height of progesterone. And every single time, every single month that we give it the finger, the body remembers. And it also means that the perimenopausal transition will be a lot more difficult because of all those times that we did not heed the listening and heed the inner listening. That's
Oh,
why having this information at a younger age and
mhm.
actually like knowing not to push yourself beyond your limits because your limits look very different throughout the cycle is really helpful. If you can start to learn this at like 18 years old, then you're going to be way more prepared and less likely to have burnout in your 30s.
My mind is just blown.
Well, let me blow your mind a little bit more. So we have the two hormones, right? We got our Lizzo, we got our Billy,
Yeah.
and now we have these four phases. So the menstrual phase, which is what you're in right now, what's coming out is actually called menstrual effluent. And that is a mix of blood, tissue, and mucus, which is why it's much more viscous than blood. Important to note, though, is that if you experience any blood clots, that are more than like 3 or 4 centimeters in diameter, that could be a sign of something more serious. So having intense clotting is not so normal. Little bit is okay because it is the endometrium, but it's usually a sign of fibroids or some other underlying root cause disorder.
May I ask you a question? A few years ago, I had an 11-day period where I was bleeding through a Super Plus tampon every 15 minutes to where I
Uh-huh.
just finally put on a diaper. And one would be like, Amy, that's odd. You should have gotten that checked out. I
Yeah.
feel the place I was in back then, and I was still in corporate, it was like, well, I've had heavy periods before. It'll stop. It'll stop. Well, as you can imagine, it did not. And I needed hospitalized and I was anemic and my hemoglobin was at a 6 and I almost had to have a blood transfusion. And what was happening, we still don't have answers today as to why that happened. The best that the doctor could say is that it seemed like my lining was regenerating on its own, like over and over again, like in real time. I don't know how
Mm.
that could happen, but okay. And then they also still have no idea, again, why. I went off birth control, and that was seemed to be the catalyst for this, whatever happened. And I needed basically what ended up happening was that what finally stopped it is they did a D&E and
Dilation and cartilage
yeah,
procedure.
they got everything out and that
Yep.
stopped it luckily. And now, like now we've just been like keeping our fingers crossed that it doesn't happen again. There's no,
Mm.
there's no answers.
I am not a medical
I know.
professional,
I know.
and just wanted to state that for all of the listeners too. But I can share a little bit of what I think was happening there. So, as I had mentioned, estrogen is what's responsible for the follicular phase, building up the follicle that soon becomes the egg. It
Mhm,
also is responsible for starting to build up that lining right inside the uterus.
mhm.
So estrogen is a very important hormone, but also if we produce too much of it, which is related to stress and cortisol can create an excess production of estrogen in the body. Then we see things like heavy menstrual bleeding happening. And that is when people talk about hormonal imbalance.
Mm.
So our hormones are not balanced. This whole topic of hormonal balance is really hard to swallow because they're fluctuating every day. And in relation to each other, they're even super different because our progesterone levels should be much higher than our estrogen levels. But estrogen dominance or overproduction of estrogen is very much connected to an unregulated nervous system where there is high stress and a high production of cortisol, and being unable to manage those core stressors manifests in an overproduction of estrogen. Also, coffee, which is a stimulant, can raise cortisol levels and also produce more estrogen. And so when we see heavy menstrual bleeding, it's most likely connected to in many different ways. It could have different pathways of being endometriosis, could be fibroids, it could be any number of things, but estrogen is usually what is at the root there, and us not producing too much of it or getting it externally from the food that we're eating, from sedentary lifestyles, etc.
So even just that, and I want to reinstate, I know that you're not a medical professional in this. However, that is the very first time, again, someone has shared something with me that makes sense because I was back then at that time in the most high octane role. So keep
So
blowing my mind. Yes, I'm.
the menstrual cycle is a vital sign, just like pooping or breathing. If we don't poop for 4 days, we're like, oh my God, there's probably
It's a
something wrong.
problem.
Or if we were to stop breathing, it's a problem. So our menstrual cycles tell us lots of things
Yeah.
when we plug in and pay attention. And bleeding over 8 days is not normal. Bleeding under 3 days is not normal. There's normal ranges and like things to be concerned about. And that's definitely something to be concerned about. So yeah, bleeding for 3 to 8 days and bleeding more than 80 ml also puts us into a field of, this could be concerning. This could be considered heavy menstrual bleeding. So those are like the parameters that people should kind of keep in mind to know that I'm not in a normal range or I am in a normal range. If we go back to the 4 phases, as I said, the levels of estrogen and progesterone are typically at their lowest, and that's because the body is resetting and it's starting the cycle all over again. And because the hormones are so low, this is what causes the top layers of the uterine lining to release and leave the body. And the things that are actually causing those cramps are these little hormone-like receptors called prostaglandins. And prostaglandins can be little bitches because they're the ones that are actually causing that pain in the tissue. But there are some things that we can do. Prostaglandins are like looking out for us. They're actually like helping move things out, but they're the ones that actually are causing the cramps.
They're contracting, right? Like
Yeah, those are causing the contractions.
they are alive and moving in me right now. Okay.
Yeah, say hi to your prostaglandins.
Hi,
Prost-
prostaglandin.
Prostaglandins are around for any time you hurt yourself. So they're just part of the body, and they are especially prevalent that we feel at that time. So after we stopped bleeding or we're like trailing off and bleeding, we've already been in the follicular phase because follicular technically starts on day 1, but we really get into what's called the follicular phase because it's the time in the first half of the cycle when the body is really like starting to gear up for that potential baby making. And so the pituitary gland in the brain sends a hormone called FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and tiny egg-like sacs called follicles start growing. One of the dominant follicles becomes the star of the show and releases estrogen, prepping the uterus for the main event, ovulation. So during this time, we're the most seemingly like men. This is when like life is good. There's more consistency. Energy levels, our social receptors are really plugged in because of the caring hormone, right? We're like really into networking. We're really good at presentations. We're really good at negotiating salaries or like really getting good with these business deals. And what's also interesting to note is that cervical mucus looks very different during this phase compared to the other phases because it starts to get more slippery. And the purpose of it getting more slippery and egg white like is that it wants to help project that sperm up as high into the vagina, through the cervix, through the uterus for potential implantation in the fallopian tube. So if you're ever wondering about your cervical mucus, why it changes throughout the month, is because it has a biological purpose to help enable that process of pregnancy.
So when we have egg whites, that is generally when we feel the most amazing. And then I always thought that the egg whites, like this is what I had in my mind, the egg whites helped grab onto the sperm, like because it's globby.
Yeah, it's like it's like slippery and helps it slip and slide. I always
Yeah.
think of it
Okay.
as a slip and slide. And if you actually look at the mucus under a microscope, the days after the period and the days leading up to the period, it's kind of like creamy and thick like yogurt, and it looks like netting. Like, no, we will
Wow.
not let you through. And then slowly, as the follicular phase goes, it goes into looking more like rocket ships. And so
Wow.
there's a lot more elasticity and a lot more stretching going on. And
Yeah.
that biological purpose is to really help facilitate that process for the sperm to go up and to meet that egg.
Wow. Wow.
I know. I know our bodies
I
are
mean,
amazing.
I'm gonna say it. We are magic.
We are. It's so cool. So then we get to the third phase, which is the ovulatory phase. And technically, it's a smaller phase, right? Like it's a fertile window. It's a time when people can get pregnant. But actually, like the process of ovulation only takes 15 to 20 minutes. And that egg only remains viable for 24 hours after ovulation. So the thing that blew my mind when I found this out was that men are fertile for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Women are only fertile for 24 hours. However, sperm can live up to 5 or 6 days if it's really good, really agile sperm in something called cervical crypts, which are like these little side walls in the cervix, or sperm hotels, as some people like to call them. So that's why the ovulation window is bigger, because you also can't predict ovulation without using fertility awareness-based methods. So that's taking your temperature, checking your cervical position, and also religiously checking your cervical mucus and charting that over time to be able to know and learn what that looks like. And during this time, some people can also feel ovulation cramps, or Mittelschmerz is what they're called. It's a German word, and it means middle pain. And the reason that they feel that, there's not like a consensus on the scientific research as to exactly why. It could be a few different things, but we know that ovulation in and of itself is an inflammatory process because things are happening and it's inflaming the things around it. Same thing with menstruation and the endometrium leaving the uterus. It's an inflammatory process. So inflammatory processes can affect the tissues around it and cause pain and then bring those prostaglandins in. The last and longest phase of the menstrual cycle is called the luteal phase, and this takes place the day after ovulation until menstruation. I like to divide this phase up into early luteal and deep luteal, with deep luteal being like the classic PMS, heavy, sloggy, introverted time, and the early luteal really being an amazing opportunity to ride some of that post-ovulation energy. And actually, this is my favorite phase of the menstrual cycle. Contrary to most people loving the follicular and the ovulatory, I really like that post-ovulatory early luteal phase because I can get my best work done and I'm super focused and very creative. Another interesting note here is that, so from menstruation to ovulation is varied because lots of things can affect ovulation. A trip that you go on because of oxidative stress might make you ovulate later. Stress might make you ovulate later. There's a lot of things that can affect the timing of ovulation, which is why we don't know when it is and why we can't predict it. But once you have ovulated, the time between your ovulation and your menstruation is always a fixed number for you.
Mm.
So throughout your whole life, from 12 to 42, your body, because it's a well-oiled machine, will always take the exact same amount of time from the ovulation to the menstruation. And it knows exactly what to do. So if it's 14 days for you, it's always going to be 14 days for you. So that's why it's really important when people start to learn their bodies and figure out exactly when they ovulate, they can backtrack to learn that fixed number. And then they can predict their period perfectly when they know when they've ovulated.
The the amount of time and money I spent throughout my college years and in my 20s trying not to get pregnant because I was constantly buying Plan B and preventative methods and things like that. What you just
Mhm.
described, it's like, yes, we ovulate only for 24 hours, and yes, the sperm survives for a long time, so it could be up to a week and things like that. That
Mhm.
provides like a little bit more, but it just, you've probably heard the trope. Women spend so much of their lives trying not to get pregnant, and when they want to, it's like actually very challenging. Can
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the shame of it is that we pump our bodies full of hormone-like substances
Sure.
to prevent this one day. And this is a 24-hour, 365 intervention that really like mutes this beautiful, natural, magnanimous process. And men don't have birth control. We haven't figured that one out yet. And like what really pisses me off is like when men don't want to use a condom, one time,
Yeah.
and they can technically impregnate 100 women in a
Yeah.
day if they
Yeah.
wanted to,
Yeah.
and we could only get pregnant during this short ovulation window. So it's when you really understand the science behind ovulation that, like me, you get really angry and see gender inequality
Yeah.
like in that very fact of how we protect ourselves.
And back to capitalism, of course, we're going to pump hormones to
Mhm.
ignore the biological nature that if we actually had the information and the education and the knowledge that you've been sharing this whole hour, we could actually do it on our own.
It does take investment. It does take time. It does take becoming a huge investigative journalist of your own body and like getting really, really nerdy. So there is a big, big chunk of that, which people have to have the desire to do. But once they do, the cool thing is you can never unlearn it.
And I'm on that journey right now through the Flow app. And I synced my husband up to it. He's like, what am I looking at?
Yeah.
We choose not to have children. That is not for us. It's more about just like understanding, just more about me and not having these assumptions and this, again, the shame, the judgment around it's that time of the month. She's this, she's that. No, we are these
No,
beautiful, beautiful, perfect, divine biological creatures.
we
And
really are.
how magical. I have a friend that calls women magic on legs because we literally are. Please tell me that you have workshops that I can send people to.
Yeah, so I have workshops that I do with companies. So I work in three different ways. One is I do one-on-one counseling and coaching with people to really understand where they're suffering and start to educate them and empower them so that they can feel more prepared in conversations with their own healthcare providers and start to do a little bit more on their side in the way of lifestyle changes around sleep and nutrition and potential supplementation, but only after we see a baseline. And my real hope with that one-on-one coaching is to be able to prepare people for the perimenopausal transition. And that necessarily means having a good menstrual health foundation. So right now I'm doing a training called the Holistic Hormone and Cycle Coaching Certification. And this is really just to fine tune my knowledge of the human body after doing like just 10 years of high level advocacy. The second thing that I do is I work with companies and deliver menstrual health and menopause awareness and sensitivity trainings, both on the like individual level. So like what are individuals potentially experiencing and why? And then we do another session that's specifically focused on workplace adjustments and changes that companies can be making. And I also provide a plug to an amazing new app called Essence app. The Essence app is an app that allows you to sync your professional life schedule with your menstrual cycle.
Yes.
And I've been working with them for the last 2 years, kind of supporting their content development and ensuring that everything is evidence-based. And Anyway, this is like a follow-on thing. It's usually meant for companies because it allows the company to offer Essence as an HR benefit
Mhm.
for its employees so that they can get like a prompt when they get an email that's like brainstorming session and that's happening on like day 26 of your menstrual cycle. It gives you a little prompt that's like, hey, Sally, are you sure you want to have a brainstorming session on day 26? It would be better to have this next week. Is it possible for you to reschedule this appointment? And you're like, no, there's 5 people waiting on me. Can't do that. But the information helps you to know in the future that, brainstorming, really good in my follicular and ovulatory phase. Maybe my luteal phase is more solo work, research, doing things where I'm by myself, picking through numbers. Accounting is a great thing to do during your luteal phase because your brain is already looking for mistakes. And so it's really kind to help with cycle syncing in a really professional way to optimize balance first and foremost, and then productivity.
How amazing would it be when we get to the psychologically safe space that we can say that? And it's in everyone's benefit. Is it ESSENCE?
It's called Essence App.
On those days, I am of no service to myself, to anyone else, and it's not fair to
That's
me.
called running your business cyclically.
Yeah.
There's a whole name for it. People are really waking up and doing this, and they're running their business cyclically, and it works out really well. You block out your calendar, or maybe you just have like 2 hours that are available. People can take
Yeah.
those 2 hours, and the rest of the days you do your tasks that are not so dependent on external stimulus. The last thing I wanted to say about the third way to work together is that I am starting the development of an app for men on female health. It's going to be like a Duolingo for female health. So a gamified way for men and fathers, especially if they have young daughters, to learn a little bit more. And so I am looking for collaborators on this app development and preferably a male CTO, actually, to get this thing off the ground. And so I also do coaching for men and partners who just want to understand a little bit more. Those are more like bite-sized nuggets of what I had shared today. And yeah, you can find me. I actually really prefer LinkedIn as a platform. I'm getting really like dragged into a lot of the politics on Instagram, and I'm not finding it to be the best way to have more authentic connection. And so I'd encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn at Danielle Keiser. I do have an Instagram page I just started for my professional stuff because I'm separating my personal and my professional, and that's Danny Health. And my website right now is danny-health.com. I am building it up because I am starting this coaching practice soon. After doing so much consulting, I'm realizing how I really like to work one-on-one with people.
We need you out here. Closing remarks as we wrap up.
My closing remarks would have to be that we would all benefit as a society if we embraced the curiosity that is inherent in understanding how our bodies and our rhythms actually work. And so I would encourage people to check in with themselves every day, either by way of a menstrual cycle app, which is like the actual like digital sense, and a felt sense by closing the eyes, taking a deep breath, and simply like checking in with yourself and asking how you're feeling today. Because I can give you, this like loosey-goosey 4 phases is how you're supposed to feel, but only you know how you really feel. And it's through measurements and patterns, seeing patterns that you're like, day 17s have been off the charts for me. I am going to like do big things on day 17s in the future as compared to like, whoa, I really noticed a difference between like day 22 and day 23. 22, I'm still riding that post-ovulation energy, and 23, I'm in the ground already. And so that's going to look very different for you than it does for me, especially as we get older and we start to go into the perimenopausal transition and, we start to get more irregular periods. So my parting words are like those that are still in their reproductive prime. So from 13 to 45, there's a real opportunity for you to get to know yourself. And it is an investment that's worth making because the returns are so high. They're so high.
Thanks, Danielle.
It's been such a pleasure. Obviously, I'm so charged up about this.
Until next time.
Until next time.